Let's talk about our hopes and dreams beyond the reach it seems. Let's talk. Confess I live in hell. I failed to fall in scheme. Maybe we can find a new pathway forward or a clue. So we may together be a symbiotic harmony where I can talk to you, you can talk to me. Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk, let's talk, let's talk.
Welcome, and we're glad to have you here in this edition of the Talk Vermont. And I am pleased to especially welcome my friend, and really in many ways a brother in so many ways, the Reverend Mark Hughes. He is the founder and executive director of the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance. And I want to spend this time allowing you actually to get to know Mark better, the work that he's done with the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, and also to find out why a charismatic individual like him winds up here in Vermont. What is his agenda? What are you hoping to accomplish, my friend? So let's get to know you. Reverend Mark Hughes, tell us about yourself.
Arnold, thanks for having me. It's good to be on the talk. I've been waiting for my turn for a while now. It's great to be here. So yeah, I mean, yes, there's a lot to unpack. You know, with that question is loaded, brother. But I would just say, you know, what initially brought me to Vermont though was cybersecurity with National Life Group. And I think it was 2009. I was chilling down in Louisiana, minding my own business, just, you know, having a great time, because during that time period, you could pretty much write your own ticket, you know, and I think it's the same with cyber today as well.
Now this was military cybersecurity.
Nope. I'd retired from the military years before that, so I've got like at least 3 other lives. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I came up and accepted a job with National Life Group. I started there in I think it was 2009, and that faded pretty quickly. Went into some consulting after that, and went into a cyber startup. Mm-hmm. And it wouldn't be until probably 2014, around Michael Brown time frame, where that Justice for All era came in, which was the C4 during that time, and continues to do a couple things on the side. But that evolved into the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, doing the work with them. But I've lived across Vermont. I've lived in Montpelier.
I think that's when I first met you. It was in
I was living in Montpelier. Mm-hmm. I've lived in Woodbury. I've lived in Cabot.
Gosh.
So
you've been out in the woods, haven't you?
I was in the woods. So I would say probably the first 9 years I was here. I was in Washington County, mm-hmm. and then I moved to Burlington. I met my wife, and we were married in 2020. So who would have thunk it? I came here in 2009 thinking I was just going to be here for a couple years, just kind of passing through, because I wanted to be close to Boston, mm-hmm. and end up, what is it now? Where are we? How many years later are we?
2009. It is now near about 15 years later.
15 years later.
16 actually.
You know, I've never lived in one place in my adult life anywhere near this long in my entire adult life.
Gosh.
2 to 3 years is usually, what I'm doing.
So what inspired you to start the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance?
You know, I think back in 2014, when I first started this work, when I saw Michael Brown, and I think, I want to say Black Lives Matter was like a hashtag at that time. And started doing some research, because I was honestly, when I started really thinking about, police killing black folks, and with seeming impunity, and also just looking at, the more I dug into it, that it seemed to be a thing, because it was Trayvon Martin. It was disturbing. It was incredibly disturbing. There was some cognitive dissonance there. There was definitely some fear, some concern, but mostly curiosity. And I started digging. And what that evolved into, as you recall, was we finally moved to a point to where it looked like policy was a place to go, because it seemed like there were some things that needed to be resolved at the statewide level. So that led to the racial disparities in the Criminal and Juvenile Justice System Advisory Panel being established. But if you recall, part of Act 54 during that year was also the Attorney General's and the Human Rights Commission's task force on disparities in all systems of state government, which was the only way we really knew how to say systemic racism at the time. It just wasn't in our vernacular at the time. So that report is out. In the next year, we rolled right into the creation of the Office of Racial Equity. The state, it was just a position that we created, which brought Susanna into the state. And I think it was like right around that time, like between 18 and 19, there was a lot of stuff that was just being uncovered. And one of the things that we were looking at really closely was this whole business about 1619, if you recall. The first African landing day was in 2019. As a matter of fact, Susanna was hand-delivered a governor's proclamation proclaiming that the fourth Saturday of August is proclaimed to be First African Landing Day.
That's right.
We started a constitutional amendment to abolish slavery that same year in 2019.
And I'm sure much of the state didn't know that slavery existed at
Much
the
of
time.
the state didn't know slavery existed in the Constitution. It was crazy. So we're making a lot of moves during that time, power moves during that time, because what it looked like is finally we got a toehold in this thing. We're saying, let's get some things done. So it seemed appropriate to create, something that was more grassroots, something that was more black-led, and also black supported and just black vision. I mean, listen to this: to secure sustainable power, ensure agency, and provide security for American descendants of slavery while embracing their history and preserving their culture. So we wanted to get something that was all-encompassing as a mission statement in moving forward, and I think we did that in 2019. So a lot of work, criminal justice system work, policing work was being done at the time. We tried to get some oversight. We were working to address various aspects of the criminal justice system. Many of them I don't even remember. But yeah, I think that was the onset of the establishment with that mission statement, and all of it was really grounded in this whole idea of, okay, we've got these disparities across all systems of state government, and everybody's kind of losing their mind, and all of a sudden it just became clear, okay, systemic racism. Systemic racism, and I'll just share a definition I brought with me.
Yeah.
It involves both the deep structures and the surface structures of racial oppression. It includes the complex array of anti-black practices and unjustly gained political economic power of whites, and the continuing economic and unjustly gained political economic power, or the resources and inequalities along racial lines. So I think I messed that up. It's the complex array of anti-black practices and the unjustly gained political economic power of whites, and the continuing economic and other resource inequalities along racial lines, as well as the emotion-laden racist frame created by whites to maintain and rationalize privilege and power. So we took that and we ran with it, and we said what we want to do is we want to start looking at statewide policies as well as community engagement and support and outreach and education. And all of this is data driven, and what we want to do is we want to build a framework around it and just start, advancing the ball across the state to get some things done. And what we did here in the city of Burlington is we went forward with the establishment of the Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Office as well. And then, of course, we would later go on when we got into 2000, the declaration that racism is a public health emergency, of course, and then that was done also statewide. So things kind of took off. Honestly, the whole thing is right place, right time.
Yep.
Just being in the right mind as well, and just focusing on what needed to be done at the time, and just seizing the moment. But it was just, really right place, right time.
Yeah. Now, you should know that I came to Vermont in '98, and after about 7 years as the head of the United Church of Christ in Vermont, I felt that some progress had been made, but I really missed a multicultural, multiracial environment. So I had to get away, and I spent the next 10 years in New York City with a church down there. But I also missed Vermont. And so eventually I came back. And I came back and discovered at that time and heard about the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance. So this was around 2015, 16 that I came back.
Yeah.
That's when I just heard about you, and I wanted to get in touch with you as soon as possible, because what I knew about the work that you were doing and the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance was doing was had a two-pronged focus, statewide and also locally, because let's face it, the greatest concentration of African Americans in this state is in the greater Burlington area.
That's right.
So tell me about how the Racial Justice Alliance, I'm going to refer to it as the Alliance if you don't.
Sure.
How the Alliance is pursuing that two-pronged approach as far as things that need to be addressed on the state level, and you've already mentioned the work that you've done in helping to establish Susanna's office, the Racial Equity Office, as well as what's going on in Burlington. Can you say a little bit more about that two-pronged approach?
That's an interesting observation because it just seems like it's really just about, where does the work need to be done? And as you said, you've got statewide, and then of course you've got Burlington. But let's take a step back and let's talk about Vermont. In Vermont, there's probably about 642,000 folks or something like that. In the Chittenden County area, I think the number is maybe somewhere around 164,000 or something like that. And we know that in Burlington, we've got about maybe 42,000 folks here in the city of Burlington. We know that in Chittenden County, because what we're doing is we're addressing racial disparities. So Black and brown folks is, I saw a number one day, it was probably over, probably just under 9,000 folks statewide or something like that for Black folks, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure about that number, but we can come back to it. The point I'm making is as you said a little while ago, if you take a look at those numbers, you'll see that the well over half the Black folks who are in the state of Vermont live right here in this county. And that's kind of by design. I'm not going to get into all of the details, but we know that our land use policies have restricted folks socioeconomically from migration into the state. And historically, what we found is that the vast majority of black and brown folks who come into the state end up here in this county. So what that means is it's important that we're focusing on statewide policy, but and a lot of folks are going to hate to hear me say this, but as goes Burlington, in many ways goes the state. And sometimes in Burlington, if we can't move the needle on something, we might be able to move it at the statewide level. In Burlington, we'll just have to be the tail instead of the head, or vice versa. So, for example, we were able to get a reparations task force done in the city of Burlington. At the statewide level, we've never been able to make that move. We've never been able to get that policy off the wall. There are instances where those situations where there's a convergence, say for example, the city of Burlington, in collaboration with probably 36 other partners, declared racism as a public health emergency, while at the same time, somewhere within a year, at the statewide level, there was a joint legislative resolution resolving that racism is a public health emergency as well. So we see in this case that we're able to do both things, do it with two separate entities. Why is that important? The importance is that the work that we're doing, it's crucial that there's a heartbeat in the city of Burlington. We know that as we're expanding the work of equity and racial justice in Burlington, that invariably the city, which is one of the largest employers here, is a $106 million business, they're going to start employing more black and brown folks, and they have. And one of the things that we thought would be important is obviously to create an environment in the city where when black folks come and gain employment with the city, that they'd be able to be retained because they wouldn't get run off. You know, like I know, that there's been a lot of black folks who've come over the years to Vermont only to leave. And the reason why that is, and we use the word like inviting and welcoming and all that stuff. The bottom line is we need to create an infrastructure that's supportive of diversity to enable it, the sustainability of their, of folks residing here, and that goes across a lot of different areas. So the policy, it's going to be important at the statewide level. We can also talk about policing. We know that, we started with the Racial Disparities in the Criminal and Juvenile Justice System Advisory Panel. Statewide, that's 79 agencies, to include the Burlington Police Department, which is incredibly important because the Burlington Police Department is the second largest police department in the state, second only to the state police. The state police covering about 90% of the territory in the state, and having upwards of, I would say, I don't think I can pull those numbers up anymore, but I would say they were staffed at over 1,200 the last time I saw. Don't hold me to that number. The point I'm making is that there are instances where we can get things done at the statewide level, and we can hold the city of Burlington accountable. Say, for example, like the fair and impartial policing policy. That was done at the statewide level, but you can bet your butt that the city of Burlington, they must adhere to the fair and impartial policing policy. Currently, right now, there's an oversight policy that came from the city of Burlington, which we're kind of almost indifferent about because it's so weak. But the point is it might be a step in the right direction. The thing is that at this stage in the game, we're probably not going to get any traction at all out of government operations committees in Senate and House on oversight of law enforcement across the state. So maybe we need to take what we can get here in the city of Burlington. So those are just some of the examples of, policy and, in the city as opposed to policy at the statewide level. And I think that that's not uncommon. There's a lot of organizations and there's a lot of folks that advocate for policy here in the county or here in the city of Burlington as well as at the statewide level, because sometimes it just depends on which way the wind is blowing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when you talk about systemic racism in basically, I guess Vermont is right now the second whitest state in the union. So you're talking about a systemic racism that really permeates all of American culture. And my premise is that when you're dealing with an overwhelmingly white state such as Vermont, it's difficult for that message, the fact that not only the United States, but Vermont itself is a product of that systemic racism. It is hard to convince people who have been used to something else, to another way of seeing life, to another world point of view, world outlook, to even as progressive as Vermont claims to be, to have that really sink into the gut, to the heart. And so I imagine the Racial Justice Alliance has encountered much resistance to, even though the state legislature, the city government has said, yes, racism is a public health emergency. We are all products of systemic racism. What has the pushback been?
Yeah, so I mean, first I would just kind of just push back a little bit on the premise, because I think that what I've discovered anyway is that, I think everybody wants to do better. And what do I mean by that? It's just, I get the sense that everybody knows that something is not right. Something is not right. This was like before, I'm talking before 2020 rather, before 2020. Because we know that George Floyd, the pandemic laid bare a lot about systemic racism. But think about this, is the first election of Donald Trump as 45 brought about a little bit of a shakeup in the state of Vermont. And recall, this was when our governor, Phil Scott, the most popular governor in the United States, was seated during that time. It's the same time frame that when Trump was elected the first time, Phil Scott was also elected at that time. If I'm not mistaken,
right,
I'm
2016,
pretty sure.
That's right.
So everybody's hair was on fire. Now, we had already been looking at this whole thing about, we were very, very concerned about policing at that time because Michael Brown happened in 2014. And we'd done our analysis. It was ongoing, but we started the community organizing. We started the research. We started the advocacy work, and we arrived at the conclusion that policy was one of the things that we needed to do. We also understood that outreach and education was incredibly important because we always need to make sure that we're informing the community and also gathering the community's input in what it is that we're doing. We also came to understand that the whole cultural piece of it was important because this environment that we're living in, because it is so white, as you just said, Black culture is like double important as far as for us to get together, to connect, to be able to find common ground, to understand our heritage and where we come from, and to understand the power and the resilience and the contribution. All of those things are really, really important, more important here than any place else. So we got that all figured out. I digress, but the point I'm making is that it was really clear to many Vermonters and many legislators that we needed to hold our ground in Vermont. So it was thousands and thousands and thousands of folks who are, white folks from Vermont, here in Vermont, indigenous folks, that made their mind up that they wanted to make sure that immigration was addressed. They wanted to make sure that racial equity, racial justice was addressed. So I think there was already some understanding that something needed to be done, which is the reason why under the Scott administration that Act 54 was passed in 2017 while Trump was in his first term.
Yeah.
And I think that's what pushed a lot of folks in Vermont to that decision, from a policy perspective. The next year, in creating Susanna Davis's office, again, Trump was in his second year. We still had a Republican governor. As a matter of fact, here's something else interesting that happened at the national level in 2018. The 400-year African American history, Commission, which is a federal commission which was established by the Congress of the United States, was passed in 2018 when Trump was still the president.
Yep.
So there were a number of things that were still going. I mean, we probably could never get that done today, but there's a number of things that were going on during that time that were possible, and I think it was because of the will of the white people of Vermont here in this state that made those things possible. I still believe that there's opportunity to get some of this done, to get some of the work done. I think there's been a huge shakeup nationally, with this administration changing. There's a lot of division happening. There's, with the attack on civil rights, with immigration, being at threat, with the LGBTQIA community under attack, with the revocation of a lot of the liberties historically afforded to the disabilities communities. There's a lot of division that's going on right now. They're coming after the poor. Yep. But at some point or another, my hope is that we're going to figure out how to pull that back together here in the state of Vermont. And we're going to find our better angels, all of us, collectively, and we're going to figure out what it is that we need to actually be focusing on. And I've got some thoughts on that for later in the conversation. But I think that, I think there's if this conversation is about hope, we haven't abandoned that. Good. I think there's a lot of opportunity that we still have to do this work. And I'm still optimistic, even though right now things, quite honestly, are quite grim.
Well, you've focused on the statewide level, but I want you to turn now to the local community,
Sure.
especially the work that you and I must add, you and your wife, Christine Kemp Hughes, is doing on the local level. I consider you both the dynamic duo because I mean the work that you're doing with the Kemp Center in cooperation with the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance is amazing. You're building a sense of community, neighborliness, cooperation that I see developing within the North End. And could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, interesting. I just left the Richard Kemp Center before coming over here to record today, and what was going on over there is they're sitting around playing chess. And so I had to run out, and one of the gentlemen that were playing chess snarkily said to me, "Hi, Mark," because I never said hi to him, and he was sitting down and he was playing. Funny, I mean, I know the guy. I mean, he's a great guy, but it was because I'm running in and out of there. Sometimes I miss things, but just a great crowd of folks that come in there, and just lots of stuff going on. I mean, some of the stuff that Christine is working on is there's a peer support group that happens on Thursdays, on the first Thursday. and they've been building that just off of just this vision that came from the Alliance, because the Alliance Wellness Working Group that meets on the fourth Thursday, what we envisioned back in 2019 was a few things. Number one is we thought there's got to be some way in which we can inform the continuing professional education and certification of mental health professionals, through the Office of Professional Regulation. And we informed that process, and that did pass, and there's something that's a part of all of our mental health professionals, recertification, their continuing professional education hours. Another thing that we said is it'd be nice to have a cultural empowerment center, because this was back in 2019. 2 years later, the Richard Kim Center would be established. So we envisioned that back during that time. During this time, we said that it would be nice to have a Office of Health Equity at the statewide level. And that position, finally, through the work of what was established as the Health Equity Advisory Commission, that person was actually hired this month for the state, she will be housed out. I'm not going to spill the beans and tell everybody who it is right now, even though I think it's public. So that person was hired. So the Richard Kim Center and the work that Christine is doing there, it's a part of a vision. Now, we continue the Wellness Working Group, as I said, but it was a part of a vision that came out of that Wellness Working Group. In the peer support group, I think it was also a vision that came out of the Wellness Working Group as well. So I'm really excited about that, because we're modeling some of the work, the mental health wellness work that we had envisioned, with health equity and also peer support that really goes towards racial trauma. So that is pretty exciting. Then there's the race, identity, culture, and history RICH program.
Acronym,
Yeah, and so Christine and I were just talking about that today, and there's a couple of times a month that group is, and we envision that, it's bad news that Black and brown children are being removed from their homes at highly disproportionate rates. It's good news that there are a lot of thriving interracial relationships, as you know, across the state. But the children are, in some ways, sometimes, just because of, as you said, who we are as a state, unfortunately culturally deprived as well. And so there's huge opportunity for us to be able to create an apparatus that serves not just the youth, but also the parents, to be able to help, to give a hand, to give a hand up in some of these challenges that folks are having, or just be a drop-in, for crying out loud, and to create a space for some of these youth and these parents. So excited about that. Movie night, as well as youth movie night, is really important in the Richard Kim Center as well. And there are a number of other initiatives. There's a jam session that has recently been established, where folks can just come by. There's a whole musical setup over there. I mean, you can walk in there, you can literally record something. So folks can just come in and just kind of hang out and play with the instruments. So lots and lots of stuff that are emerging. Emerging is media justice, a collaboration with CCTV, farm justice, a collaboration with Intervale, but just a lot of things that are emerging, that are coming out of that and just beginning to thrive. So super excited about that. Then there's the Racial Justice Alliance themselves, and I brought a couple of slides, and we're not going to put those up, but I'll just speak to some of the things that I have printed. But don't forget about our agenda legislatively, because we do have the justice agenda, and some of that is economic justice, reparations, equal protection. I'm not sure if our audience is aware of it, but we're in our second biennium of moving an equal protection constitutional amendment. we just said earlier that we moved a slavery abolition constitutional amendment, and that passed, I think it was the second Tuesday of November of 2022 is when there was a general referendum on that. So in 2026, if we're fortunate, we'll have an equal protection, and I think timely enough, an equal protection constitutional amendment. And this kind of augments or parallels the equal protection clause of the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. But other initiatives, justice data, we're back to data transparency across the entire criminal justice system. Instead of just looking at policing data, let's look at the data from prosecutors, from sentencing data, from the judges, data from corrections. So those types of policies, community health and wellness, oversight. So there's a number of health equity, a number of policies that that we're advocating for at the statewide level. We talked about racism as a public health emergency here in the city of Burlington, as well as at the statewide level. And we also talked about some of the things that we were doing. There was this initiative called Turning the Curve on Systemic Racism, Building Back a Better Vermont. And what that was is it was a play off of that particular initiative, Racism is a Public Health Emergency, and the buy-in of those dozens of organizations, UVM Medical Center, Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, CVOEO, Champlain Housing Trust, the list goes on and on and on.
When you say give initiatives, I mean abbreviations, some people outside the state especially don't know what you're talking, so CVOEO.
That's Champlain, let me see if I can get this right. You put me on the spot. Champlain Valley Economic Opportunity Office. And that's state and federal. But all of these organizations signed off on this initiative and also moved forward with at least 2 or 3 areas that they committed to doing the work. That's the work of addressing systemic racism within their organization. Some of them were initiatives, some of them were structural, even organizational, structural changes that they made, addressing systemic challenges. So kind of a big deal. We want to get back to that. Right now in this climate, in this environment, we want to be talking about racism as a public health emergency 2.0.
Yeah.
We want to definitely go back and revisit that. I'll tell you a little bit about an initiative that we call Raise Up Justice.
Tell me more.
So Raise Up Justice is a fusion movement. This is a multiracial, intergenerational, interfaith, multi-abled, and politically independent movement that's really focusing on the current climate. And see what we're doing now, right now in this particular climate, because right now this is crucial. As I said, it's grave. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is grave, what we're experiencing right now, literally. The civil rights, the trajectory and the velocity of where civil rights have come from where we were on January 19th is on par with a place and time where we would take ourselves to maybe right around 1890 in the United States. And this is real. We're talking about civil rights, and this goes for housing, education, employment. So, and here's and I don't want to call it irony, but just the frustration or maybe even the challenge or the fear is it's exactly what we were fighting against before this whole thing started.
Yeah.
Before the 20th of January in 2025, it's everything we represented. It was everything we were targeted at. And essentially, the rug feels as though it's been being pulled from under us as we speak. So the reason why, say for example, civil rights policies, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title I, Title VI, Title IX, all of these activities, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the work being done in those areas to mitigate, to strategically address the disparities that exist in these systems, because the outcomes of these systems by definition, consistently, persistently, and insidiously produce racially and disparate and adverse outcomes, the intention is the work that we were doing is to mitigate that, to address it. And currently, right now, what it looks like is that these policies that are coming from this administration, these policies target the dismantling of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. They target the dismantling of civil rights enforcement. They target the dismantling of even the social safety nets that were put in place to protect or to support those folks who were severely impacted by the outcomes of these systems. In fact, I'd even go a little bit further, is the aim is to reestablish traditional hierarchies of race and gender reminiscent to Jim Crow.
Yeah.
So what we're challenged with is that. So as we're doing this work today, it's a different climate. It's a really different climate. And what that means is this fusion movement that I'm talking about has to focus on civil rights. It has to focus on equal protection. It has to focus on human rights. It has to focus on non-violence because the cards are stacked against us. The system has been weaponized. Sure. We got to be careful, but we got to be deliberate. It has to focus on a beloved community. So this multiracial, intergenerational, interfaith, multi-abled, politically independent group meets on the third Thursday of every month. So that's at the Richard Kim Center at 6 p.m. and we also do that with a hybrid arrangement. So those are a couple of the things that we're doing. I know you're probably wondering about the analysis because we've done some analysis on this. We really haven't let up on the analysis. In fact, I'll tell you a little bit about that. What we've come up with is we know that the current administration, and again, this is just the current administration. This could be any administration, could be any person. This is not about any individual. This is we can't even necessarily put it on the 77 million people who voted in this way per se, because this is the fabric of who we are. We are the United States of America, and what we know is who we've always said we are has always only been aspirational, as Langston Hughes had told us very well. The America that we want to be, we never have been. And hopefully, when we get on the other side of this, we'll start to make progress towards that again. So in this analysis, the reflection is really about this coordinated effort to reverse what's underway is there is a reversal on any efforts that we sought out in an attempt to expose this system and to implement a strategy of addressing and mitigating systemic racism. The counter narrative, I think we missed it. I don't know about you, but when I watched this entire process play out on television, we saw the train wreck of a debate that Biden had. God bless you, Joe Biden. I hope you get well. We saw the inflammatory rhetoric and the racist rhetoric that came at us just full steam ahead. The weaponization of terms like CRT, the weaponization of the term woke, the weaponization of the term DEI,
which is just a prelude to the weaponization. I shouldn't say the aftermath of the weaponization of affirmative action.
Exactly. Well, we saw affirmative action because remember the Supreme Court's they're in this too. I mean, the Supreme Court's in this too. So we've got a supermajority on the Supreme Court that's conservative, which is not the first time. In fact, we've always had a majority conservative Supreme Court with one exception in the history of the United States. We've always had a majority conservative Supreme Court,
Yeah.
and often super. And so that was, affirmative action was put to bed, as we know, with Chapel Hill and Harvard back a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And that was actually it wasn't the beginning of the end, it was the final nail, because they had been peeling back affirmative action for the last 40 years. We know that it had already began that corporations were rolling back diversity, equity, inclusion programs, and that litigation was already being pursued in courts surrounding DEI and other what I like to call corrective programs and policies. ARPA was challenged, USDA. There was a bunch of stuff. I've got a presentation on that was already happening before the president, before he took office. So one of the things that we have been working on in this movement, this movement that I was telling you about, is a counter narrative in Raise Up Justice that goes towards. It talks about justice, it talks about stability, and it talks about safety for all. Because what we know is whenever we're pursuing policies that are in any way exclusionary, at the end of the day, they end up hurting everybody.
Yeah.
And that's what we're experiencing right now. Is that there have been policies, even with the state of Vermont, with our land use policy. The reason why there's no housing and the reason why we can't grow our population in the state is because of Act 250,
right,
which was really tragic because they were trying to keep folks out of the state.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, we ended up, chopping our foot off to spite our toe or something. I don't know what the term is. But I think true justice and stability and safety for all Americans is really only achievable by acknowledging and addressing systemic racism and the legacy of slavery. You see, what we believe is that this administration is trying to shut that down, and at the end of the day, that's going to end up hurting all of us.
Yeah.
The reason why we are where we are is because we just didn't finish the work. In every single time in history when the pendulum swings in this direction, and we've been here before, it's because somebody got either impatient with the process or afraid, so they've decided to try to shut this thing down because of fear of a browning nation, because of fear of less relevance, because of fear of inability to gain total and absolute economic and political power.
And the fear is partly based upon an incorrect narrative, or let's say a narrative.
Just a lie.
Yeah, right. And because when I, for instance, think about affirmative action, the group that was most benefited from affirmative action
White people.
White women, in fact. And so, but that is not the information that has been disseminated. It has been mostly an act that favors black people. That's the narrative that's
the narrative that's been put out there.
Yeah. And DEI is another term or expression that has been weaponized. It is really a way of trying to inclusivize the workforce and all other institutions that have intentionally discriminated against not only people of color but diversity. And so my fear is that we're moving in a direction where you have a majority culture, white Europeans, who are afraid of losing power, and Trump pretty much represented that fear, and is doing all it can, what I refer to as like a battle of the bulge. The battle of the bulge was Hitler's last chance before to win the war before he was inevitably defeated.
Right, exactly.
We're doing this with Trump. It is part of a last-ditch effort to try and preserve the past in light of this wave of inclusion, this light of this brown wave or this multicultural wave that's about to happen. They wanted to prevent it from happening. So that I think is sort of the wave that organizations like Vermont Racial Justice Alliance is moving against. And it's not only moving against a majority white culture, but it's also moving against Black and brown people who have bought into that narrative.
Yeah, yeah.
And so how, I'm asking the question, and you don't have to give the answer, but at least how do you confront that frustration, which I know you must see every day?
So, I mean, frustration, when I think about this work, I think two things. Number one is that it's not us who are frustrated. It's not my job to be frustrated. I think that maybe there's some emotional intelligence that goes into this. But the thing about the work that we're doing is that you and I both know that you can't beat truth. You can't beat it. You can't beat justice. At the end of the day, truth and justice, they're going to stand. And no matter what comes our way, when the smoke clears, as sure as there's a God, what's going to happen is that will prevail. It's going to prevail. It doesn't mean it's not going to get ugly. It doesn't mean that we don't have some tough times ahead, as Dr. King said towards the end of his life. There are some tough times ahead. And I think that being true to ourselves, being true to who we believe, and being true to one another, and standing on truth, standing on justice, all of this stuff that we're experiencing right now is premised on a lie. Everything that this thing represents, we're doing an analysis right now, and I would just go back to the counter narrative. True justice and stability and safety for all Americans. We're not going to get there without addressing the legacy of slavery in this nation. Period. We're not going to get there. So we can get there today. We can get there next year. We can get there in 5 years, in 50 years. We can go another couple hundred years. It may not happen when we're here. It probably more than likely will not happen when we're here. The thing about this movement, about what it is that we should all be in, and this is not an alliance thing. This is a people thing. This is a human thing. It's not about black or white. It's not about red or blue. It's about right and wrong. And at the end of the day, if you got somebody building something off of a lie, and you know at the end of the day that if we don't do something different, that it's going to take us to the edge of ruins. At some point or another, no matter what everybody else is doing, somebody's going to get a clue. Hopefully, somebody's going to get a clue. And ultimately, some of us are going to come together and we'll defeat this. Now, that doesn't mean that it will be without challenge. It doesn't mean it may not be without frustration, and it may take a while. But I honestly don't believe that it's time for us to be frustrated right now. I don't think it's time for us to be upset right now. I think it's time for us to be focused. I think it's time for us to focus in on what is actually happening around us. To be able to teach one, that civil rights protections, civil rights, because you see everybody is going in a lot of different directions, but there's something underneath all of this. Because at the end of the day, if we're the United States of America, if we're a republic, and this is a democracy, and we're the United States of America, and if we know that this nation has been set back to 1890 on civil rights, and that has been normalized, and we're okay with that, then this is not the United States of America. See, I'm a retired Army officer, a warrant officer. And what I know about the United States of America is that those aspirational things, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. Even though we never achieved that, I think the heart and the soul of this nation has always been desirous of being that, not this.
Yeah.
And I think that us as people of faith, we also understand that God knows exactly what he's doing. So I think if anybody is like frustrated, or if anybody is like, having tantrums or just staying up late at night just trying to figure out what the next thing is and pulling their hair out, it's them. It's not us.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think this is a time for us to be focused, to keep our eye on the prize, to understand that you can't beat right, you can't beat justice, you can't beat the United States of America. God is with us, and there are certain things that we've got to do in order to make that come to fruition, and we all have a job. And somebody needs to either lead, follow, or get out the way, but we got to get this done. So I think that's as far as narrative is concerned, we've got over like 150 executive orders to parse through. We're getting clobbered right now, Arnold. We're getting clobbered, and everybody's just losing their mind, and most folks are saying, oh, well, those executive orders, they're all being challenged in court. They don't really mean nothing. They don't hold the weight of law. That's not true. So we've got to, in our work, analysis is incredibly important. And you know that data has been behind everything that we've done up until now. And, what I know, and this is a note from my data guy before I came on today, he sent this over at 5:08. He said the executive orders from the first 100 days could threaten African Americans' civil rights across multiple domains. He said, now, let me tell you how he came to this conclusion, first of all. This he's a retired IT guy, white dude, who's been with the Alliance for the last 5 years, working data. And he's the one, based upon all of that data that you see on our website, based upon census data and based upon analysis, being able to flesh out quantitatively racially disparate outcomes across all systems. So also qualitatively, they've been able to create, and there's 3 other data folks on that team, they've been able to create data cards, and you can drill down into them, there's heat maps, all that other stuff. But what they've been doing over the last maybe month or so is a deep analysis on these executive orders. And they've been able to, with the use of AI and other technologies, and I'm talking about AI, I'm talking about smart AI, I'm not talking about dumb AI, I'm talking about legal AI, to be able to crunch all of these executive orders and do a deep analysis and come out with some statistics. And you'll be able to see that. We'll be in South Burlington in our Truth and Justice series on next Tuesday. Truth and Justice series is a series that I'll tell you about later. But what I'm getting at is here's what he came up with is education, prohibiting discussions of systemic racism and eliminating diversities, removing affirmative action in diversity programs in federal and contractor hiring and employment, eliminating disparate impact liabilities under fair housing laws and housing, and the criminal justice system increasing in aggressive policies without civil rights safeguards, voting rights, implementing ID requirements that disproportionately affect Black voters, equal protection, removing equity initiatives designed to address historical discrimination. This is what he said. He says the orders generally reframe anti-discrimination efforts as discrimination themselves, potentially reversing decades of civil rights progress. So he got down right into the nitty-gritty of like what this administration is doing. So again, I can't stress enough, this fusion movement is incredibly important in the work that we're doing, because right now we're far too splintered. We're far too splintered in the work that we're doing, and we're not focused enough on the common denominator as far as what it is that's impacting all of us. So the executive order analysis is really, really important. And there's one that I want to call out right now for everybody to pay particular attention to, and that is Executive Order 14288. 14288. So what this thing is doing is it says it's strengthening and unleashing America's law enforcement to pursue criminals and protect innocent citizens, is what they said it would be doing. And I did some deep analysis, and I'm not going to get into a lot of detail because I don't want to gratify a lot of folks who are, some of the white nationalists and white supremacists that are behind some of this policy. But I would encourage many folks to take a look at what these numbers 14288 actually mean. What I will say is that there's actually 14 words that white supremacists are using, and there's 2 stanzas, and those of you who know what I'm talking about know what I'm talking about. And the 88, both of those are they go back to some language that's actually saluting the guy who was over the Third Reich. So that's this language. Okay, that's what this is all. You're not going to hear that everywhere, but like I said, our folks, we've done our homework. We know what this is all about. If you're unleashing the police, we know what this is all about. Yeah. So what it does is it establishes a legal defense fund for the police, 14288. It also limits federal oversight. The Department of Justice is ordered to review and revise all existing consent decrees. And that's with all of the federal agencies. Also empowering law enforcement to direct federal agencies to prioritize resources. That's training of officers, salaries, investing in prison infrastructures, modernizing crime data systems. So all of this, also the military transfer to police, that's in coordination with the SecDef and Homeland Security. They're increasing distribution of excess military equipment. Yeah. This is unprecedented. At executive order, that military equipment is being transferred into our municipalities. This is weapons, surveillance, technology, tactical equipment, all of this stuff. This executive order provides them the ability to do that. Enforcement against local officials. This is the big one. We saw that the mayor of Newark was just arrested last week. What this does, this basically says, if the local officials impede law enforcement officers from doing their job, then the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, can come in and pursue legal courses. That is to say, to arrest them. So all of this stuff together means something significant. As a matter of fact, I haven't even given you the worst of it, because the Homeland Security Task Force, which is spoken of in Section 6 of this general order, goes back and calls out another executive order that established the Homeland Security Task Force, and that was back in January. The Homeland Security Forces, there is one that was established, that was directed to be established in every state of the United States, and also a command and control center was directed to be established. They are the ones to execute this executive order. So we got some serious problems. Yeah. Because now what we need to do is we need to figure out, how do we organize around pushing back on this? And this, again, by far, the DEI, the civil rights and all that other stuff, because of the nature of this particular policy, this particular executive order, is by far the most threatening, the most dangerous executive order that exists right now, because at the end of the day, again, it looks like they're just coming after black folks, because we know what police do in black communities. It looks like that. But again, when you create an exclusionary policy, that hurts one group, at the end of the day, everybody ends up getting hurt.
Yeah.
What this is the recipe for martial law.
Yeah. Yep.
That's what this is. So we can sit back and pretend that this doesn't exist, and white folks can say, oh, that this doesn't pertain to me, and you can refuse to organize. But at the end of the day, martial law is for everybody.
Yep. Yep.
So, so this is the reality of some of the stuff that we're dealing with right now on the ground. It's real. It doesn't mean that we need to fall out, lose our minds, or anything like that. It doesn't. What it means is we've got a very, very evil group of folks who want to do some terrible things to people, and all of it at the end of the day, because this is not about how much folks hate black folks, though many do. I mean, don't feel too special. They hate Jewish folk too. They hate disabled folk too. They hate LGBTQIA folks too. So, and I'm not trying to take the heat off, but I'm just saying there's a lot to talk about here.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, what is going on here. This creates division. This creates confusion. This creates distraction. At the end of the day, once martial law happens, at the end of the day, once you get absolute power, then you don't ever have to worry about passing a bill like they're passing right now to make sure that the rich folks get the tax break, because it'll be automatic.
Yeah.
And we don't have to vote anymore either, because that'll be over.
Yep.
So this is about political and economic power, absolutely.
Yeah. Mark, thank you so much. One of the things the public does not know, the viewers does not know, is that you made some interesting transitions along the course of your life. You were raised a Republican, and you gravitated to the Democratic Party.
Not quite, but it sounds like that.
Okay.
So,
what I'm basically saying is that you bring with you an experience and sensitivity on both sides of the aisle, you might say.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I would say I was raised kind of politically agnostic. I know that my family were I'm sure it was Democratic. My mother came out of the South, out of Mississippi when she was a little girl. She had 12 siblings. I never went to the polls. I didn't know what a poll looked like when I was a kid. But I sensed that there was this strong, it was blue. It felt, if I had to look back at it, it was blue. When I joined the military, everything flipped upside down. When I got married, I was God and country in the military, completely devoted. And Ronald Reagan was the president of the United States. I voted for him in 1984. I voted for George H.W. Bush in 1990.
It's 1990, I think it was.
1990,
Or 88.
88. And then things begin to change after that. But yes, absolutely. And the thing too is when I came to Vermont, I was big in the Democratic Party when I first got here. I mean, what I mean by that is I ran the Shumlin. I worked on the Shumlin campaign, and then at some point or another got a bitter taste out of that and went over to the Progressive Party and spent some time with the Progressive. Was on the state coordinating committee, was in the Burlington coordinating committee of the Progressive Party. I have no party affiliation today. I don't think there's a political party that can do right by black people today, quite frankly. I don't. I think that the Progressive Party and what they showed me is that they haven't had a regard for what it is that's important for us, and they haven't been proactive or assertive or preemptive in the work that they've done, even to this day. Nor has the Democratic Party, and the Republican Party. Who knows? I don't even know what they're doing, but God knows. But the thing is that this is not this is not blue. This is not red. What we're talking about here, this is about, and I think the thing about us as black folks, at some point or another, if we're going to really make a change, we got to step out of the political process and apply pressure to it from the outside. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that First African Landing Day was huge. The the implementation. What we did is here's what we did. We figured out the 1619 project I told you about by Nicole Hannah-Jones. That I think was a Pulitzer Prize winning article in the New York Times in August of 2019. That, and I told you about the 400-year African American History Commission, which stood up to acknowledge the 400 years from 1619, the landing at Point Comfort. And I think the other thing is we identified the 1619 traveling exhibit out of the Hampton Museum. And that the convergence and the power of all of that stuff, and as well as what we knew we wanted to do is creating something cultural to acknowledge, to recognize, and highlight the resilience and the contributions of Africans since 1619, to acknowledge the impact that slavery and the laws that enforce racial discrimination have had on the United States, and to educate the public about the arrival of Africans to the United States. What we were able to do is get the governor to proclaim that. So I think that right there has been going on every single year ever since. So I just wanted to shout that out to everybody, because that is our holiday. We created it, we claim it, we maintain it. It's not like we just adopted Juneteenth. God bless Juneteenth. We'll have another conversation about that later. But this one was one that we created. This is one of the ones that we envisioned and we created, and we're really happy. We're excited about it.
Mark, it is so good to have you on this show. This is probably just the start of future engagements that you and I will have, because there's just so much to talk about and so little time to do it.
Too much.
Yeah, well, I am so grateful to have you here, and you can expect another invitation somewhere down the line.
You know I'll come back anytime.
Thank you, my brother.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us. Our next program will focus on Loving Vermont, Loving Day Vermont. It is an organization that really celebrates interracial families and interracial relationships in Vermont and across the country, based on the Supreme Court decision back, I think, in 1969, prohibiting laws that discriminated against people marrying across the color line. So we're going to talk with people in that organization, the challenges as well as the positive experiences they have in being an interracial family here in the state. So we're thankful that you joined us this evening. Be good, be blessed, be safe, and I'll see you next time.
Let's talk about our hopes and dreams, beyond the reach it seems. Let's talk, confess I live in hell, I failed to fall in scheme. Maybe we can find a pathway forward or a clue, so we may together be a symbiotic harmony, where I can talk to you, you can talk to me. Let's talk, let's talk. Let's talk, let's talk, let's talk.